Hello there, YouTube. Today, I'm reviewing Promise of Blood by Brian McClellan. Or, as Alan from the Library of Alexandria says, Promise of Blad. Because for some reason he's unable to pronounce the word blood. I have no idea why. But, all jokes aside, Promise of Blood. It is the first in the Powder Mage trilogy, and probably the best known and most well-read flintlock fantasy that exists. So, it's a fairly popular book, and chances are if you're familiar with the fantasy booktube community, you've heard of this book. Though it's still a niche book. It's still one that outside of certain communities is still on the undercurrent. So I still feel that this could do with a little bit of exposure, because outside of the fantasy booktube community, people are unlikely to have heard of this. So, what even is flintlock fantasy? Well, flintlock fantasy is a rather new, emerging subgenre of fantasy, set in a fantasy world where, rather than a medieval or classical take on fantasy, where most things are focused on swords and sorcery or some kind of barbarian thing, think Conan the Barbarian, we're moving forwards down the technological tree to a point where gunpowder and usually some level of rifling exists. So we're going past matchlock and wheellock pistols to flintlock and early rifles. That's the point where we're generally talking. So, this is set in a fictional world, but it's very, very reminiscent of the French Revolution. You follow the main character, who is Thomas, and a few of his friends, his confidants, his allies, and even his son Taniel, who, honestly, Taniel as a name, I would have preferred if they'd just gone with Daniel, which is an actual name, rather than making up a word, Taniel, because it ended up with a situation where the main character Thomas and Taniel both started with a T, which I felt was an unintentional alliteration in the names that added a little bit of confusion that could have been avoided if they'd simply gone with the name Daniel. But that aside, that's just a personal little grievance I felt that they could have worked on. You follow these characters as they overthrow the monarchy and attempt to gain control in the capital city and surrounding areas of their country whilst instituting a new republic. That's the concept. And for the most part, it's done well. I would say that this book is particularly fast-paced, very, very thrilling, is good at describing enough that you get a sense of the tone and feel of the book without being too focused on description. You get a sense of where you are and what's happening, and a very grimy military feel, whilst at the same time it maintains a pace that is befitting action. You will read through a scene and it will happen very, very fast. You'll move from set piece to set piece. You'll move from gunshot to gunshot in a time that feels appropriate for the kind of scene you're watching. There are a few things that I feel detract a little. There is at one point, fairly early in the book, there is a heavy hint that there is almost an institutionalized rape that happens when military overthrow certain people, and it's indicated that it's a normal thing, that if there is a civil war, a warring faction, and one side takes the other, if they capture an area, any servant women or the daughters of nobles, they are just your prize to rape as you wish. That is the indication. It is somewhat ham-fistedly included, and it is seemingly included just to make the point that it happens, as it has very little bearing, I feel, on the actual story. I don't feel that was necessary, and whilst I understand the tone it was attempting to convey, I don't think it was needed. There is an issue towards the latter half of the book where the theming and pacing changes, where the beginning of the book focuses heavily on the revolution and the aims to maintain order within the city, the shifting of allegiances, who is on whose side. By about the halfway point, there is instead an undercurrent storyline that bubbles to the top, and it quickly becomes an international affair, as the country now has to look outside its borders at other potential threats, some of which may in fact be incredibly powerful supernatural threats. I feel that by the end of the book, the supernatural threats that are discussed and established for the latter half are so powerful in the way they're described that they undermine the effectiveness of any of the strategy, any of the politics, any of the actions of anyone who's not one of those powerful individuals, and it creates an imbalance in the setting that I feel damages the storyline. I would say that that any of the characters having that level of power makes them feel so overpowered by comparison to everyone else that it stops the other characters from feeling they have agency. And I do feel it makes the second half substantially weaker. I will also say there is an unfortunate incident towards the last quarter of the book where some characters are being pursued by some kind of mountain lion. It's like a cave lion thing. The thing is, the way that this area is described, it is described as some inhospitable mountain. And now, if they were being chased by these cave lions for a while, then fair enough. But they make it seem as if there is little to no vegetation, little to no life in that area, that food is scarce, that warmth is difficult to come by, and then later down the line, people who are being pursued by these cave lions seem to have a pack of cave lions that would be ridiculous in size. Like, we're talking dozens of cave lions chasing down this group, and that one issue breaks my suspension of disbelief, because the way these animals are described, they're described kind of halfway between a cave bear and a mountain lion. And these would be apex predators. These would have huge natural boundaries to their territory. And whilst they may hunt in packs, they may have a pack mentality. There could be a pack of 6 or 7 of them, where there's a few of them raising cubs, all living in the same cave or sharing kills, that kind of thing. That works. But when there are dozens of them, dozens upon dozens of them, when previously one was a really big threat, and suddenly dozens just stream out from anywhere, that should be a massive, massive ecological issue. That should be something that you can see a mile off. The trails they leave should be so huge that should never happen. I feel that the level of scale in the last quarter of the book was lost, as I feel that Brian McClellan kind of forgot the levels of scale and threat that he had established, and just went on to up the tension by increasing numbers. And it seriously hurt the latter part of this book for that scene, at the very least. So, other than that, I have little issue with the way the story went and how the characters' actions were resolved. I feel it was a satisfying story, and that everyone acted in accordance with their established character. There were a few things that jumped out as foolish choices or boneheaded manoeuvres, but they were things that were within character for them to be foolish. At the same time, people who were military tacticians acted like military tacticians. They didn't charge into battle for no reason, but they were not super geniuses one minute and fools the next. There was a certain consistency that I appreciated. So, all in all, I would say that from a storyline, theming, and content perspective, if you enjoy military fantasy, you will probably enjoy this. If you enjoy grimdark, you will likely enjoy this. This book has multiple character deaths. It is a civil war after all. People die in a war. It has quite a lot of action. It's quite fast paced. There is also an investigation happening throughout the book, as the leader of the revolution hires someone to investigate his own upper echelon in order to find out if he has any traitors who are likely to defect and lose him the city. Which is all very interesting. A few criticisms is that there are a lot of characters and they are introduced very quickly with maybe one or two traits per character. The characters are actually fairly well realised, but it will probably take a reread before you actually get a sense of all the characters and can tell them apart immediately, because they do not have a great deal of screen time, if that makes sense. I say screen time as if I was comparing it to a TV show. I would say this book, at its length of, let me just see now, 545 pages, feels like a reasonable length. However, it could easily have been 800 pages and had a couple more establishing scenes for each of Tomas's upper circle, his lieutenants, his keys to power. By having a few more establishing scenes, they would have become more fixed in the reader's mind, and the investigation to see which of them, if any, could be potentially stabbing him in the back or defecting to the royalists would have been a much more fulfilling story. Whilst I was able to follow along with that, I know from Buddy Read that others were not able to follow along and found the characters quite forgettable and could not really distinguish between each of the keys of power comfortably. They didn't see them as having much of a personality, so it didn't feel like the mystery held much weight for them. That is a criticism that I think is fair, and whilst I found it extremely fast-paced, even I, at the beginning, was struggling to determine who was who within that upper circle. The side story with Tanyon, I felt, was particularly well handled. It was action-paced, it was lower stakes, and it was an excuse to take a position where we're following Tomas and his keys to power, his inner circle trying to maintain order with the city, and then we follow someone far further down the totem pole, as it were, just trying to do one job within the military and following his attempts to succeed at that mission. That was interesting, though I would have preferred that we'd spent less time with Tanyo and more time with Tomas. I feel that Tomas's story was the more complex, and it would have benefited from more time. Ultimately, this book was too short. That's what I feel. I would say that it would have been a delicate balancing act to increase the amount of time we spent with Tomas and with his inner circle, his keys to power, in order to establish them better without damaging the pacing. But it's something that should have been done, and my understanding is that this is Brian McClellan's first novel. So if that is the most criticism I can give, I suspect his later novels are going to simply improve. Because whilst I feel that we can add more to this to improve it, it is usually the other way around. Usually writers write way too much and we need to cut in order to get it down to a reasonable length. The fact that this was done in as short amount of pages as it was, and it was still coherent and I was capable of following it, shows that this is still engaging and well conceived. So, those are my criticisms. I feel that it's a book worth checking out if you like the elements I've spoken of, but if you're not one for fast-paced military scheming and military action, you are going to find this to be confusing, somewhat boring. You're going to be jumping from place to place, scene to scene, with very little time to establish character motives or character nuance. You're going to find that you'll have an idea as to who Tomas is and what he's doing and what he's thinking, but everyone around him is going to feel quite wooden and quite small in their scope. They have a lot of meaning behind them, but their personalities are not well reflected on the page. This could very well have been 2 books if they wanted to. If Brian wanted to take the Tanya storyline and do it separately and just focus on the Tomas storyline, that could have worked. So it is an acquired taste, I feel. As for prose, I feel the prose is quite simple without being too simple. It's utilitarian, which is a good thing for the pacing and the sheer amount of information that they get across. It would be hard to make this descriptive, or it would be hard to make this flowery in any way. It would be hard to insert purple prose without significantly bloating this book. This was not a choice to make it simple out of a lack of ability. This was a concerted effort to be as to the point and utilitarian as possible in order to make sure the pacing remained extremely fast and frenetic. This was a concerted effort. This was a purposeful choice, and it works very, very well. When descriptions are required, especially during the initial scenes, where we're describing uniforms and when we're describing the initial royal palaces, when we're describing some of the streets and even the positioning of people in a battle, they are described very well. And simple things like describing the smell of gunpowder and the design of buttons was managed to fit into the story in such a way that it didn't feel like it was slowing any of the scenes down, but established just enough that you could visualize it more in your head. It was a very, very good attempt at a very low amount of description and purple prose, whilst maintaining just enough description to maintain the atmosphere. A fantastic effort, and one that I applaud Brian McClellan for. So ultimately, where do I place this book? I think that this is an extremely purposeful novel. This is going to appeal to a very, very specific group of people, and those people are likely to love it. I personally love this. This is fantastic. I like the fantasy elements. The magic system is well explained. It's treated like a scientific element. It is not intrusive, and it builds off the French Revolution era firearms setting. So we end up with a magic system that is based primarily off gunpowder, using gunpowder almost like a drug allergy, and that works really well for this. It means that there's very little in the way of high fantasy elements. This isn't going to be fantastical in the way a lot of people expect. This is going to feel more like historical fiction, wartime historical fiction, with a sprinkling of fantasy thrown in just to change things up a bit. And that's fine. If you like that, this is going to really scratch an itch. This is a 4-star for me. Without any hesitation, this is a solid 4-star. I feel that should Brian have added a little more establishing, a little bit more of an establishing moment for the upper ring of his cabal, then that would have been more interesting. Perhaps if he had taken the storyline with Taniel and removed that and used that space to better establish his lieutenants and his keys to power. That would have made for a better, more focused story for Tomas, and that would have been a better book, I feel. And then the story with Taniel could have been a companion novel, shorter, maybe even a companion novella, depending on how you do it, because you could have inserted some of the scenes from Taniel's story into this book and completed Taniel's story as a companion novella or something along those lines. I would have seriously looked back at the parts involving the cave lions. I felt that was badly mismanaged, but those scenes alone are the only ones where I feel there was a serious break in immersion. Other than that, I have few complaints. As the beginning of the series, I'm excited to continue with the series. I am interested to see which characters continue on and how they grow. And I would highly recommend this for someone who likes complex fantasy, complex political intrigue, but wants something way more fast-paced. If you're someone who enjoys something like a Game of Thrones, but finds the slow pacing of that to detract from it, this has the opposite issue, where the pacing is so fast that some people lose who the characters are. So it is it's a different style of the same. It's a different approach to the same style of writing, I would say. Hopefully that has informed people as to exactly what to expect. As for length, it felt reasonable in length. We have an average number of words per line, around 11 per line, and we have .33 lines per page. So we're looking at around 360 words per page at maximum. It'll probably average out at somewhere around the 320. So given that, you'll probably be reading this at a pace of about 1 page per minute if you have a fast reading speed, maybe 2 pages every 3 minutes. So you can expect the 548 pages to last you a significant amount of time. I would say expect this book to be around 12 hours of reading for the average reader. You could theoretically get through this in 10 hours. It may take you more. You could be looking at a 15-hour read. Either way, it is not it's not a ridiculous length. It's something that you could comfortably read in a week or two if you read consistently every day. It's not something you're going to finish in a weekend. So be aware of that. It's a little bit too fast-paced and a little bit too long to push that. But I think that it is a solid and enjoyable read that doesn't overstay its welcome. my preferred version of this book would have been a little longer, would have moved the Taniel storyline to a companion novel or novella, and would have ended up being almost twice as long at that point. At which point it would have been significantly more to read, but I feel that there would have been upgrades in that regard. But we can only speculate on the improved version. Still, 4 stars out of 5 is a fantastic rating for me. Anything 3 stars and above is a positive, and 5 stars is as rare as chicken teeth on this channel. So don't expect it to come along very often. 4 stars is a straight recommend. This is one where I detail why you may not enjoy it, but if this sounds like something you might enjoy, my 4-star means you almost certainly will enjoy. That's my intention. Hopefully this has been informative, and if you do choose to pick up Promise of Blood, I hope you enjoy it. Till next time, see you later. Bye.